for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. Hunter Biden thought his legal problems were over, but hold on a minute. The judge says, nope, not quite yet. We'll give you some details about what happened in court. We also have to talk about efforts in Michigan to recall several state lawmakers. We'll tell you why that's unfounded. Oregon has passed gun control laws that have now been upheld as constitutional by a federal judge. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about, finally, the ProPublica investigation into the group called Homevestors of America. They are the parent company of the website We Buy Ugly Houses. So we'll talk about what's happening there. We have an update on the fake electors scheme. One of the defendants in the case has now been barred from running elections. So we'll tell you about that. Plus, the water's getting hot in Florida. Highest recorded ocean temperatures ever. And people are protesting in Israel. And we've got a great update on the UPS Teamsters talks. Some good news there, or at least potential good news. We'll tell you about all that in just a moment, but before we get started with today's topics, a couple reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio, or are we calling it X now? I don't know. I still have the blue bird up on my phone, so I guess that's going to be Twitter until we're told otherwise. Who knows? You can also follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio, and you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. A special note to our Stitcher users: if you listen with the Stitcher app, a reminder that Stitcher is shutting down next month. So by the end of August, they're no longer going to be in business. They're telling everybody to go to Pandora. So we'll see how that goes there. So we might see some more hits from our Pandora site. We actually prefer that you use either Spreaker or Apple Podcasts because we can actually get numbers on how many people are listening and where you're from. So we greatly appreciate that. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. Let's get to our top story. We are recording this show on Wednesday, July 26, 2023. And our first story has to do with the plea deal involving Hunter Biden. This is Claudia Lauer, Randall Chase, and Colleen Long writing for the Associated Press. This is dated July 26th out of Wilmington, Delaware. The plea deal in Hunter Biden's criminal case unraveled during a court hearing Wednesday after a federal judge raised concerns about the terms of an agreement that has infuriated Republicans who believe the president's son is getting preferential treatment. Hunter Biden was charged last month with 2 misdemeanor crimes of failure to pay more than $100,000 in taxes from over $1.5 million in income in both 2017 and 2018, and had been expected to plead guilty Wednesday after he made an agreement with prosecutors who were planning to recommend 2 years of probation. But U.S. District Court Judge Mary Ellen Noriega, who was appointed by Donald Trump, raised multiple concerns about the specifics of the deal and her role in the proceedings. The plan also included an agreement on a separate gun charge. Biden had been accused of possessing a firearm in 2018 as a drug user. As long as he adhered to the terms of his agreement, the gun case was to be wiped from his record. Otherwise, it's a felony charge that carries 10 years in prison. The overlapping agreements created confusion for the judge, who said the lawyers need to untangle technical issues, including over her role in enforcing the plea deal before moving forward. Well, she's confused because she's a Trump appointee, just like all Trump appointees are. They don't know what they're doing. They're like Ottawa Impact. They don't have a clue. They're like a post turtle. You see a turtle on top of a fence post, and you're like, how did he get there? And then once he's up there, he doesn't know how to get down. There you go, folks. That's Republicans for you. Judge Noriega said, quote, "It seems to me like you are saying just rubber stamp the agreement, Your Honor. This seems to be form over substance," end of quote. She gave defense lawyers and prosecutors 30 days to explain why she should accept the deal. In the meantime, Hunter Biden pleaded not guilty to the tax charges. The collapse proceedings were a surprising development in the years-long investigation and a resolution that had been carefully negotiated over several weeks and included a lengthy back and forth between Justice Department prosecutors and Biden's attorneys. The plea deal was meant to clear the air for Hunter Biden and avert a trial that would have generated weeks or months of distracting headlines. But the politics remain as messy as ever, with Republicans insisting he got a sweetheart deal and the Justice Department pressing ahead on investigations into Trump, the Republican Party's 2024 presidential primary frontrunner. Well, yeah, because Trump incited an insurrection. He should be in prison. Jesus. Trump is already facing a state criminal case in New York and a federal indictment in Florida. Last week, a target letter was sent to Trump from special counsel Jack Smith that suggests Trump may soon be indicted on new federal charges, this time involving his struggle to cling to power after his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden. Republicans claim a double standard in which the Democratic president's son got off easy, while the president's rival has been unfairly castigated. You know what I say to that? No, Trump has been rightfully castigated. I'd like to castrate him, too, while we're at it. Congressional Republicans are pursuing their own investigations into nearly every facet of Hunter Biden's dealings, including foreign payments. On Wednesday, the judge asked Biden to be more specific about his business relationships and to discuss his substance use issues as she combed through the plea agreement. She asked him to name the Ukrainian and Chinese entities referred to without name in the agreement. She also asked him the last time he used alcohol or drugs and whether he was currently receiving treatment. Biden answered June 1st, 2019, and said he was not currently in treatment, though he did say he was in an anonymous support program for his substance issues. President Biden, meanwhile, has said very little publicly except to note, quote, "I'm very proud of my son," end of quote. Well, there you go. So we'll see what happens in 30 days. Oh, my gosh. This could be interesting stuff here. You know what? It seems like relatives of presidents always bring trouble. If you go back to the 70s, you had Jimmy Carter's brother, Billy, being a dumbass on a regular basis. George H.W. Bush, you could say the W was a dummy. And then the dummy became president. And then his little brats flipping off the media. Now one of them's part of the media, if you can call her part of the media. More like fluff pieces. I wouldn't compare her to Walter Cronkite, Frank Reynolds, or Tom Brokaw anytime soon. Or John Chancellor, Peter Jennings, any of the greats. Dan Rather, any of them. And now we got Hunter Biden. Apparently the family screw up. We'll stay on top of this. Right now, let's go back to Michigan. This is John King writing for the Michigan Advance. This is dated July 22nd. The head of a nonpartisan group committed to voting rights is highly critical of petitions to recall state lawmakers, calling the effort a case of sour grapes. The Michigan Advance earlier reported recall petitions against 6 state representatives from Michigan, 5 Democrats and 1 Republican. You can now add 2 more petitions seeking recall of a 6th Democrat and a 2nd Republican. The newest petitions have been filed against State Representative Noah Arbit, Democrat, West Bloomfield, and Representative Donnie Steele, Republican, Orion Township. Jamie Lyons-Eddy is the executive director of Voters Not Politicians, which spearheaded a 2018 initiative reforming redistricting in Michigan and a 2022 effort that expanded voting access across the state. She told the Michigan Advance, quote, "Let's be clear, these recall efforts against duly elected legislators from both parties are anti-democratic. Simply put, they are a waste of taxpayer money and distract lawmakers from what voters sent them to Lansing to do." End of quote. 3 petitions target state representatives Jennifer Conlin, Democrat, Ann Arbor, Reggie Miller, Democrat of Belleville, which is just right outside of Ann Arbor, and Jamie Churches, Democrat of Wyandotte, which is a Detroit suburb, for their yes votes on legislation to expand the definition of hate crimes to include violence on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, age, and disability. That was the same rationale for the petition turned in Wednesday against Arbit. In a statement, Arbit said, quote, "I was notified by the Secretary of State that a recall petition was filed to remove me from office prior to the constitutional expiration of my term on December 31st, 2024. The stated justification for recalling me is my vote to pass House Bill 4474, the Michigan Hate Crime Act, on June 20th. The petitioner is correct. Not only did I vote for HB 4474, I wrote it and I sponsored it in one of the proudest, most meaningful moments of my life. I will never apologize for fighting to protect all Michiganders from hate violence, and I will never be intimidated or cowed out of achieving my mission. I made a promise to the people of West Bloomfield, Commerce, and the Lakes. I promised that I would lead the fight against rising hate and extremism and to relentlessly advocate for this community that I love. That is exactly what I have done in my first 6 months in office, and that is what I will continue to do as long as my community has confidence in me to represent them with faith and fidelity." End of quote. According to the Michigan Secretary of State's office, Arbit's petition was filed by 73-year-old Gerald Clixby of West Bloomfield. Misinformation spread by Fox Propaganda Channel and other right-wing outlets falsely said the bills would criminalize using the wrong pronouns for a person, despite the fact that pronouns are not mentioned once in the legislation. The bill, however, expands Michigan's hate crimes definition to include perpetration against individuals on the basis of their gender expression or sexual orientation. It would also raise the penalties on hate crimes, depending on the incident, to a 5-year maximum prison sentence or a $10,000 fine, or both. Currently, the law calls for a maximum of 2 years in prison or a $5,000 fine, or both. Churches told the Advance that the petitions were a coordinated attack that served as a distraction from the real issues facing Michigan families. She said, quote, "It takes the focus away from the strong policies women legislators are working on. I knew when I entered politics that we would face obstacles, but at the end of the day, these strong policies are worth fighting for." End of quote. Arbit concurred, calling the effort a, quote, "baseless partisan recall designed to overturn the democratic will of the voters of West Bloomfield, Commerce, and the Lakes and demonstrate the best of who we are, rooted, ready, and relentless." End of quote. The recall petitions for Representative Sharon McDonnell, Democrat of Troy, and Representative Betsy Kofia, Democrat of Traverse City, cite their yes votes on the House's version of red flag gun legislation to allow for judges to issue a temporary order for the removal of firearms for defendants that pose a significant risk or threat to themselves or others. The red flag legislation coming from the Senate was signed into law in addition to other gun law reforms in May. I should mention Betsy Kafia has been a previous guest on this show the first time that she ran for state representative about 10 years ago. Kafia told The Advance in an interview Thursday that the recall attempt would not distract her from her work. She said, quote, "We're going to let it play out. Anyone has the right to file a recall petition, but I'm not going to allow it to distract me. We've already done some great work in the first 6 months, like the rural equity funding for our schools, and I'm going to stay focused and keep doing the job I was elected to do. We'll let it play out." End of quote. McDonald tweeted a response to the petitions, calling them a, quote, "last-ditch effort to subvert democracy," end of quote, noting that the 102nd Michigan legislature had passed more bills in the first 6 months than in the previous 6 years combined. Yeah, those last 6 years under Republicans. Actually, the last 30 years under Republicans. Democrats get the job done. Republicans don't. If you want to go forward, you put it in D, drive. If you want to go in reverse, you put it in R for reverse. It's really that simple, folks. It really is. Except when there's fake Democrats like that idiot in West Virginia, Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema. McDonald said, quote, "We are seeing a movement by some to disregard the will of the people by using recall procedures to disrupt our elections process. I am grateful for the overwhelming support of the Democratic caucus and local community, and I can assure you that I will not be deterred from doing my job." End of quote. Steele's recall was also connected to gun reform, but in her case it was for her vote in favor of House Bill 4139, the House version of legislation requiring the safe storage of firearms. House Minority Leader Matt Hall, Republican of Richland Township, on Friday released a statement defending Steele. He said, quote, "Representative Donnie Steele has emerged as a strong leader in Lansing. As our lead addressing critical infrastructure needs, she's been a fiscally responsible voice pushing to fix our crumbling roads and bridges in Oakland County and around the state. She's focused on what matters for the district she represents. She has our full support, and we will defend her as we would any other member." End of quote. Republican Representative Cam Cavett of Sheboygan had a recall petition filed against him last week, in his case citing his yes vote when the House elected Representative Joe Tate, Democrat of Detroit, to act as House Speaker for the legislative session that began in January. In an emailed statement, Cavett said that the recall efforts are, quote, "partisan tactics aimed at serving the interests of one political faction," end of quote. He added that rather than addressing critical priorities for his district and the state, the recall petitions will divert time and resources from making progress. Ironically, while 6 of the 8 targeted lawmakers are Democrats, it was Republican former Governor Rick Snyder who signed Republican-led legislation in 2012 that added some extra hurdles to the process. That legislation followed the 2011 recall of former Representative Paul Scott, Republican of Grand Blanc, who chaired the House Education Committee and came into the crosshairs of the Michigan Education Association after pushing through teacher tenure reform. Scott ended up being recalled from office by less than 200 votes. Yeah, the teachers finally got pissed off and said, "Oh, we're getting rid of you." And they did. Yeah, Republicans, as I have said for several weeks, and I will continue saying, Republicans go after education for one simple reason. They want your children to be just as dumb or dumber than they are. They really do, folks. The 2012 legislation Snyder signed beefed up the requirement that recall petition language had to be clear to mandating they be both clear and factual, which heightened the possibility that typos and misspellings could lead to rejection. It also shortened the signature gathering period from 90 days down to 60 days. That means those seeking the recall will have to secure an amount of signatures that is at least 25% the number of votes cast for all candidates in the last governor's race within 60 days of the approval of the petition language by the Board of State Canvassers. If successful, the petition would lead to a recall election at the next scheduled election. Let me remind you, recall elections cannot happen within the first 6 months or in the last 6 months of a legislator's term, because that was also part of the reforms signed into law by Snyder. Regardless, voters, not politicians, Lyons Eddy said the petitions are out of line with the spirit of the recall process. She said, quote, yes, recalls are an important tool in a democracy, but voters know very well that they are intended for cases of criminal behavior or dereliction of duty, not sour grapes about votes that someone doesn't like. In our democracy, the remedy for lawmakers who aren't accurately representing the views of their constituents is the next election, which in the case of the Michigan House of Representatives is less than 18 months away. End of quote. So there you go, folks. All right, let's get to some good news for a change. This is Maxine Bernstein writing for OregonLive.com. This is dated July 14th. A federal judge ruled that Oregon Control Measure 114's ban on the sale or manufacture of large-capacity magazines and its requirement for a permit to purchase a gun are constitutional. U.S. District Judge Karen J. Immergut found that the Second Amendment does not protect magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition, and even if it did, that Oregon's restrictions on the use of such magazines are, quote, consistent with the nation's history and tradition of firearm regulation, end of quote. The magazine ban does not rise to an unconstitutional taking of property and is not retroactive or vague. That is according to the judge's ruling. Judge Immergut found that while the Second Amendment protects an individual right to self-defense inside and outside of the home, large-capacity magazines are not commonly used for self-defense and therefore not protected. Further, she ruled that the new regulation requiring a permit to buy a gun in Oregon is consistent with the type of regulations the U.S. Supreme Court already has found constitutional under the Second Amendment. The 122-page decision followed a week-long trial in Portland last month that centered on whether the new gun regulations hold constitutional muster in the wake of last summer's landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling in New York that set a new standard for interpreting the Second Amendment right to bear arms. Immergut's ruling marks the first comprehensive decision on Oregon's new law based on a full record of testimony, exhibits, and arguments. However, her decision is likely to be appealed and could end up before the nation's high court as part of a rapidly evolving case law on the hotly contested issue. The trial represented a consolidation of 4 cases filed by plaintiffs challenging the voter-approved measure, which included the Oregon Firearms Federation, 3 county sheriffs, 2 gun store owners from Kaiser and Pendleton, the Bellevue, Washington-based Second Amendment Foundation, and the Oregon State Shooting Association, which is Oregon's affiliate of the National Rifle Association. They forgot a partridge in a pear tree as well. Measure 114 calls for a permit to buy a gun, a ban on the sale, transfer, and manufacture of magazines holding more than 10 rounds, and a completed criminal background check before any sale or transfer of a gun. In November, voters approved the measure with 50.7% of the vote, but it has been stalled from taking effect since a state judge put it on hold in a separate challenge under Oregon's Constitution. In a statement reacting to Immergut's decision, Oregon Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum said, quote, "Great news from the federal court today. Our team looks forward to ultimately prevailing in the state courts as well," end of quote. During the federal trial, attorneys for Oregon and the nonprofit Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety argued that the measure's regulations are common-sense restrictions reflecting the nation's historical response to dangerous weapons. They urged the judge to honor the people's will. Jess Marks, executive director of the Alliance for Gun Safety, said Immergut's opinion is a, quote, victory that belongs to those who have lost loved ones to gun violence and to all the Oregonians who demanded change. We know Measure 114 is an effective and life-saving policy, and now a federal judge has ruled it is also in line with the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court has articulated that Second Amendment rights are not unchecked. They come with responsibilities, and the district court affirmed this in our case. End of quote. Lawyers for gun rights groups challenging the measure argue that the regulations violated Oregonian Second Amendment right to acquire a gun for self-defense and gun dealers' rights to due process. Kevin Starrett, executive director of the Oregon Firearms Federation, criticized Immergut's decision on the group's website, posting, quote, "What we have read defies belief. While not entirely unexpected, Immergut's ruling is simple nonsense and sure to be overturned at the Ninth Circuit." End of quote. Immergut analyzed the measure in light of the U.S. Supreme Court's 6-3 decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. versus Bruin in June 2022, striking down a New York law that had placed strict limits on carrying guns outside the home. The court's majority directed lower courts to use a new text and history standard when evaluating challenges to gun regulations. Courts must determine whether the Second Amendment's plain text protects the conduct in which the plaintiff wishes to engage, and if it does, then decide if the regulation, according to the ruling, quote, is consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, end of quote. In her opinion, Immergut found that while ammunition magazines may often be needed to render a gun operable, large capacity magazines are not needed, and that most guns that accept detachable magazines can accept magazines that hold 10 rounds or fewer. She ruled the large capacity magazines are not bearable arms protected by the Second Amendment. She wrote this, quote, "A firearm is not useless without a large capacity magazine because magazine capacity is not a determining factor in the operability of the firearm. And the right to bear arms does not become meaningless because the government chooses to restrict LCMS, large capacity magazines." End of quote. So there we go. Good news, finally. I'm sure the Republicans are all just ripping their hair out in Oregon. I love it. And right now, let's go to our next story. This is a story that we've been trying to get on the air for several weeks now, but we have just simply run out of time because of the amount of topics that we've been covering the last 3 weeks or so. This is Anjanette Damon and Bayard Duncan writing for ProPublica. This is dated June 28th. We had mentioned in an earlier show about a group called We Buy Ugly Houses. It's a business. It's a franchise where they buy homes. So let's get to the meat of the story here. The president and CEO of Homevestors of America, which is the parent company of We Buy Ugly Houses, announced that he will step down this summer after an investigation by ProPublica found some of the company's home buying franchises had deceived sellers and targeted people in vulnerable situations. In a letter announcing his departure to owners of We Buy Ugly Houses franchises, David Hicks said retirement, quote, has been on the horizon for some time, end of quote, but added that recent press coverage had taken a, quote, personal toll on me, end of quote. Hicks will be replaced by Larry Goodman, the company's chief operating officer, on August 1st. Hicks added, quote, I know Larry will continue the tradition of ensuring that Homevestors conducts all business with honor and excellence in giving homeowners an option for difficult-to-sell properties. He is ready, and it is time for me to spend more time focusing on my family and my health. End of quote. Hicks did not respond to a request for comment, and the Homevestors spokesperson did not immediately respond to follow-up questions after sharing Hicks's letter with ProPublica. Hicks, who became co-president in 2009 and president in 2017, oversaw a period of tremendous growth at the company, which bills itself as the largest cash home buyer in the country. The number of franchisees has increased from about 165 in 2009 to nearly 1,150. The company was also bought and sold multiple times during Hicks's tenure. It's now owned by Bayview Asset Management, which acquired Homevestors in 2022. In previous interviews and in his retirement letter, Hicks has said he believes Homevestors helps communities by purchasing difficult-to-sell properties and returning them to the market in an improved condition. In his letter, he said, quote, "As CEO of Homevestors, I have witnessed firsthand how we have been able to make a direct impact on people and communities in which we operate. It is this feeling of helping others that has kept me in this business for nearly 20 years. End of quote. Oh, really? It wouldn't have anything to do with all the money you've been making, would it? However, ProPublica's reporting found Homevestors focused its advertising campaigns on people in vulnerable situations and taught franchise owners how to find the pain of a homeowner in order to buy houses for rock-bottom prices. In some cases, franchisees targeted elderly homeowners who did not understand the contracts they signed. Others were in such dire financial situations that they became homeless after selling to a Homevestors franchise. In a 2020 interview, Hicks said houses targeted by his company smell so bad flippers want to take a shower after visiting them. He said with a chuckle, quote, "That cat piss smell, you know what that smell is? That's money." End of quote. In his retirement letter, Hicks said that ProPublica's reporting, quote, "mischaracterized our business," end of quote, drew hurtful conclusions, and reflected a, quote, "minuscule portion of our transactions," end of quote. But in a Zoom meeting before the story was published, he told franchise owners he also believed ProPublica's investigation would, quote, "make us a better company," end of quote. He added that Homevestors would change some practices in response to the reporting while laying out a plan to bury the story. A Homevestors spokesperson said ProPublica's investigation referenced a fraction of the company's transactions. She touted an internally calculated 96% customer satisfaction rating. She also said that predatory behavior identified by ProPublica isn't taught or tolerated, and that, quote, "lying is against our code of ethics and our culture," end of quote. Yeah, they really went there. As they're cheating people out of their homes. Oh, we don't want to lie. Yeah. Since the story's publication, 2 U.S. senators and the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have called for more scrutiny of Homevestors and companies like it. The Homevestors spokesperson said the company is, quote, "committed to ensuring a fair and equitable homeowner-customer experience," end of quote, and welcomes policies that protect homeowners. Oh, really? I don't believe that for a second. Evan Goldman, partner and co-chair of the franchise law group at the law firm Greenspoon Martyr, said in an email, quote, "generally when a CEO steps down, it opens the company up to self-reflection. Here, hopefully, the necessary parties will see the harm that HV has inflicted upon his franchisees and seek to right the ship for the future. More so, it's my hope that the future generation of franchisees are in a better position financially and otherwise as a result of this change of leadership," end of quote. Well, we'll see what happens. I have a feeling they're going to go down in flames, and probably sooner rather than later. Right now, let's go to our update on the fake elector scheme. This is Joy Capoletti writing for the Associated Press. This is dated July 20th out of Lansing. A town clerk in Michigan will be barred from running any elections after being charged earlier this week by the state attorney general for acting as a fake elector in 2020 for Donald Trump. On Thursday, the Michigan Bureau of Elections notified Stan Grott, Republican from Shelby Township, he's been their clerk since 2012, by the way, that he will be prohibited from administering elections while the charges are pending. And apparently we have a court date. It looks like August 10th is going to be the court date in Ingham County 54A district. You know what? I might have to take a drive down to Lansing for this. That could be real interesting. I'll try and get down there and get some audio. Grott was among 16 Republicans charged earlier in the week by Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel for allegedly signing certificates that falsely stated that Trump won the state, not Biden. Each of the 16 people faced the same 8 criminal charges, including forgery and conspiracy to commit election forgery. The most serious charges carry a maximum penalty of 14 years in prison. And whichever judge, I'm going to add this, whatever judge hears this case, if they're convicted, give them consecutive sentences, not concurrent. Throw concurrent out the window. So if they get charged with 2 14s, give them 14 and 14, one after the other, 28 years. If they got a 14 and a 5, give them 19 years. Drop the hammer on these people. In a phone interview with the Associated Press, Grott declined to discuss the charges against him, but pledged to adhere to the directive in the letter. He said, quote, "There's a request for me to recuse myself from elections until the issue of charges is resolved, and I intend to abide by it." End of quote. Yeah, because he knows Dana Nessel will throw his ass in prison. Conducting elections is one of the primary duties of a clerk. Grott is an elected official and will continue in his other roles as township clerk, such as preparing agendas and recording meetings. Shelby Township is a suburb of Detroit with a population of close to 80,000 people. The letter provided by the Secretary of State's office says that while Grott is, quote, "innocent until proven guilty," end of quote, his alleged role in the fake elector scheme, quote, "undermines voter confidence in the integrity of elections," end of quote. Local clerks across the country have faced legal consequences for alleged crimes committed after embracing Trump's lie that the 2020 election was stolen. A former clerk in Colorado, Tina Peters, is awaiting trial after an alleged effort to breach voting system technology that is used across the country following the 2020 election, according to an indictment. Stephanie Scott, a small-town clerk in Michigan accused of improperly handling voting equipment after casting doubt on Biden's election victory, was stripped of her election duties in 2021. She was ousted by voters earlier this year. Now, let's get the next investigation going. Let's get the Republican Attorney General candidate, along with the Berry County Sheriff, in prison for their roles in tampering with voting equipment by illegally confiscating it. Yeah, hey, Dar, do you hear me? I want you in prison. Grott and others allegedly met inside the Michigan Republican Party headquarters on December 14th, 2020. Yeah, in the basement, secretly. They signed their names to a certificate stating they were the qualified electors for Trump and transmitted the false documents to Congress and the National Archives. That's according to an affidavit released by Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. The group included the head of the Republican National Committee's chapter in Michigan, Kathy Burden, as well as the former co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party, Michonne Maddock, and Kent Vanderwood, the mayor of Wyoming, a suburb of Grand Rapids, which we mentioned on last week's show, and he needs to resign. The 16 individuals charged are scheduled to appear in an Ingham County District Court August 10th for arraignment. In the past, Grott has also served as a county commissioner, county deputy treasurer, and assistant secretary of state, according to his Shelby Township biography. He sought the Republican nomination for Secretary of State in 2018 before dropping out due to family obligations and, quote, timing and the overall political atmosphere, end of quote. Yeah, so there it is, folks. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can try to get to Ingham County 54A District Court with the recording equipment to be able to pick up all this. This is going to be great, and I'm going to enjoy it immensely. Yeah, I'll have to file for a press pass for the court. I might have to do that pretty quick. All right, let's get to some really disturbing news. This is Seth Borenstein writing for the Associated Press. This is dated July 26th. The water temperature around the tip of Florida has hit triple digits, hot tub levels 2 days in a row. Meteorologists say it could be the hottest seawater ever measured, although some questions about the reading remain. Questions from who? Scientists are already seeing devastating effects from prolonged hot water surrounding Florida. Coral bleaching and even the death of some corals in what had been one of Florida Keys' most resilient reefs. Climate change has set temperature records across the globe this month, and we're not done yet. We're not done. Not by a long shot. The warmer weather is also fuel for hurricanes. And by the way, when the coral dies, you're going to get more storm surge because it's the coral reefs that help to keep the storm surge from coming up on shore. So there's another effect of climate change, folks. Scientists were careful to say there is some uncertainty with the reading, but the buoy at Manatee Bay hit 101.1 degrees Fahrenheit Monday evening, according to National Weather Service meteorologist George Rizzuto. The night before, that buoy showed an online reading of 100.2 Fahrenheit. Rizzuto said, quote, "That is a potential record," end of quote. Yale Climate Connections meteorologist Jeff Masters said, quote, "This is a hot tub. I like my hot tub around 100, 101. That's what was recorded yesterday," end of quote. If verified, the Monday reading would be nearly 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than what is regarded as the prior record set in the waters off Kuwait 3 summers ago at 99.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Masters said, quote, "We've never seen a record-breaking event like this before," end of quote. The consequences for sea corals are serious. NOAA researcher Andrew Ibarra, who took his kayak out to the area, quote, "found that the entire reef was bleached out. Every single coral colony was exhibiting some form of paling, partial bleaching, or full-out bleaching," end of quote. He added that some coral even had died. This comes on top of bleaching seen last week by the University of Miami when NOAA increased the alert level for coral earlier this month. Until the 1980s, coral bleaching was mostly unheard of. But Ian Enochs of NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory Ocean Chemistry and Ecosystem Division said, quote, "But now we've reached the point where it's become routine," end of quote. He added that bleaching, which doesn't kill coral but weakens it and can lead to death, occurs when water temperatures exceed the upper 80s. Masters and University of Miami tropical meteorologist Brian McNulty said while the hot temperatures do fit with what's happening around Florida, Monday's reading may not be accepted as a record because the area is shallow, has seagrasses in it, and may be influenced by warm land in the nearby Everglades National Park. Still, McNulty said, quote, "It's amazing," end of quote. McNulty added that the fact that 2 100-degree measurements were taken on consecutive days lends credence to them. Water temperatures have been in the upper 90s in the area for more than 2 weeks. There aren't many coral reefs in Manatee Bay, but elsewhere in the Florida Keys, scientists diving at Chica Rocks found bleaching and even death in some of the Keys' most resilient corals. That is according to Enochs. Enoch said that there aren't many coral reefs in Manatee Bay, but elsewhere in the Florida Keys, scientists diving at Chica Rocks found bleaching and even death in some of the Keys' most resilient corals. He added, quote, "This is more, earlier than we have ever seen. I'm nervous by how early this is occurring," end of quote. This all comes as sea surface temperatures worldwide have broken monthly records for heat in April, May, and June, according to NOAA. McNulty said that temperatures in the North Atlantic Ocean are off the charts, as much as 9 to 11 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than normal in some spots near Newfoundland. That should scare people right there. You're getting up to Newfoundland and it's getting to be warm water. Yeah, you better be petrified. All right, we got to get to our next story here. This is rather interesting. Protests in Israel. This is Isabel Deborah writing for Associated Press on July 26 out of Jerusalem. Israel's highest court said Wednesday it will hear legal challenges to a divisive new law that weakens its power, putting the country's top justices in the position of defending their own independence and escalating a political crisis that has unleashed the country's biggest protests in history. Israeli civil society groups and others filed petitions asking the Supreme Court to strike down the law enacted Monday, the first major piece of legislation in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's broader plan to overhaul Israel's judiciary. The opposition's legal challenges are pushing Israel toward a showdown over the foundations of its system of government. The court faces massive public pressure to strike down the law and has an inherent interest in preserving its powers and independence. But if it does so, Netanyahu's government could ignore the ruling, setting the stage for a crisis over who has ultimate authority. Amir Fuchs, senior researcher at the Israel Democracy Institute, a Jerusalem think tank, said, quote, "If there is no judicial review, it means the Knesset has total power," end of quote. The Knesset is the conservative party in Israel. Basically, Netanyahu is Israel's Donald Trump. Critics of the overhaul describe it as a blow to democracy, arguing that Israel's judiciary represents the primary check on the powers of the Prime Minister and his majority coalition in Parliament. The supporters of Netanyahu's far-right, ultra-Orthodox government say the law will prevent liberal, unelected judges from interfering with the decisions of elected lawmakers. They also say the court should not be able to rule on a law limiting its own authority. Simcha Rothman, a right-wing lawmaker spearheading the overhaul, told the Associated Press, quote, "To have the court decide its own powers by itself, that's not separation of powers. That's not democracy," end of quote. Oh, really? No, you're a bunch of fascists. You right-wingers. You ultra-Orthodox, want to push your religion on everybody. No. Absolutely not. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis have poured into the streets to protest against the plan for the past 7 months. You know what those Israelis ought to do? Get together with the Palestinians and really have some fun. The overhaul also has drawn concern from Israel's closest allies. The Biden administration called the outcome unfortunate, and the European Union said Wednesday it was, quote, "following the developments in Israel closely and with concern," end of quote. The United States and the EU have expressed fears that pushing through the judicial overhaul in defiance of mass popular resistance could undermine what the countries routinely describe as their shared values. The EU said, quote, "It is important that the core values on which our partnership are based are preserved," end of quote. Israel has no constitution, relying instead on a set of basic laws that enshrine rights and freedoms. The Prime Minister governs through a majority coalition in Parliament, in effect giving him control over the executive and legislative branches of government. As a result, the Supreme Court plays a critical oversight role, a safeguard against corruption and the overtly political appointments of unqualified candidates to important jobs. The law passed Monday strips the Supreme Court of its power to block government actions and appointments on the basis that they are unreasonable. The Supreme Court did not issue an injunction on Wednesday as petitioners had asked, but said it would hear challenges to the new law after the Knesset returns from recess in September. It asked the law's defendants to submit a response at least 10 days before the preliminary hearing. The Movement for Quality Government in Israel, a good governance group, said in its petition that the law undermines Israel's core values as a democracy and that it was passed through a flawed legislative process. Iliad Shraga, the group's chairman, said on Wednesday, quote, "We will appear in the Supreme Court to defend Israeli democracy, and we will do everything we can to stop the coup," end of quote. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. It's a coup. Netanyahu's allies have vowed to press forward with more judicial changes after the parliamentary recess. Another planned bill would give the parliament control over how judges are appointed. The opposition party, Yesh Atid, along with pro-democracy groups, have filed a separate petition asking Justice Minister Yariv Levin to convene the powerful committee that picks the nation's judges. Both the governing coalition and the opposition traditionally are represented on the 9-member committee, but proponents of the overhaul have sought control of the committee, drawing accusations that Netanyahu and his allies were trying to stack the judiciary with cronies, because that's what he's trying to do, really, he is. The opposition sees Netanyahu's attempts to delay the committee's formation as a backhanded way to enact part of the judicial overhaul without political consensus. With Israel in turmoil, its credit rating was downgraded this week, with agencies warning that the fallout from the judicial overhaul could make the countries less attractive to foreign investors. Yanei Spitzer, economist at Israel's Hebrew University, said, quote, What's happening now is just a fraction of the economic damage we are set to experience in the long run. End of quote. Now, hey, they brought it on themselves. This is what happens every time you vote for conservatives anywhere in the world. You get dictators, wannabe fascists. You do, especially the ones that go around with their Bible and start swinging it around, or the Quran, or whatever holy book you want to mention. I'll just say it. Christians are the absolute worst of the bunch. Yeah, I just said that. Because it's true. All right, let's get to our final story for today. This is some more good news. This is Hallelujah Hadero writing for the Associated Press, dated July 25th out of New York City. United Parcel Service has reached a tentative contract with its 340,000-member union, potentially averting a strike that threatened to disrupt package deliveries for millions of businesses and households nationwide. The agreement was announced Tuesday, the first day that UPS and the Teamsters returned to the table after contentious negotiations broke down earlier this month. Negotiators had already reached tentative agreements on several issues, but continued to clash over pay for part-time workers who make up more than half of the UPS employees represented by the union. The Teamsters hailed the agreement as historic. Under the tentative agreement, which still needs union members' approval, full and part-time union workers will get $2.75 more per hour in 2023 and $7.50 more by the end of the 5-year contract. The agreement also includes a provision to increase starting pay for part-time workers, whom the union says are the most at risk of exploitation, from $16.20 per hour to $21 per hour. And that's really what the minimum wage should be for everybody. The average pay for part-time workers had been $20. Teamsters General President Sean M. O'Brien said in a statement that UPS put $30 billion more on the table due to the negotiations, saying the deal, quote, sets a new standard in the labor movement, end of quote. The two sides had already tentatively agreed to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a full holiday and to end forced overtime on drivers' days off. Tentative agreements on safety issues were also reached, including equipping more trucks with air conditioning. UPS had also agreed to eliminate a lower-paid category of drivers who work shifts that include weekends and convert them into regular full-time drivers. Under the agreement, the company will create 7,500 full-time jobs and fill 22,500 open positions, allowing more part-timers to transition to full-time. Carol Tomei, UPS CEO, said in a written statement, quote, together, we reached a win-win-win agreement on the issues that are important to Teamsters leadership, our employees, and to UPS and our customers, end of quote. Voting on the new contract begins August 3rd and concludes August 22nd. Industry groups, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, labor leaders, and President Joe Biden applauded the deal. Well, who gives a what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce applauds? I could care less what they have to say. After the U.S. Chamber of Commerce speaks, this is what you need to do. Because what comes out of their mouth is crap. Oh, boy. The White House said Biden spoke via phone with Tomei and O'Brien and pointed to their agreement as evidence that collective bargaining works and offered his best wishes for a smooth ratification. Union members angered by a contract they say union leadership forced on them 5 years ago argued that they should have shouldered the more than 140% profit growth at UPS as the pandemic increased delivery demand. Union workers said they wanted to write what they saw as a bad contract. Union leadership was upended 2 years ago with the election of O'Brien, a vocal critic of union president James Hoffa, son of the famed Teamsters firebrand who signed off on that contract. The 24 million packages UPS ships daily amount to about a quarter of all U.S. parcel volume, according to the global shipping and logistics firm Pitney Bowes. According to UPS, that's equivalent to about 6% of the nation's gross domestic product. During the last breakdown in labor talks a quarter of a century ago, 185,000 UPS drivers walked out for 15 days, crippling the company. A walkout this time would have had much further-reaching implications, with millions of Americans now accustomed to online shopping and speedy delivery. The consulting firm Anderson Economic Group estimated a 10-day UPS strike could have cost the U.S. economy more than $7 billion and triggered significant and lasting harm to the business and workers. Logistics experts warned that the other U.S. shipping companies do not have the combined capacity to handle all the packages that would come their way during a UPS work stoppage, and that prices of shipping and goods would inevitably increase. Meanwhile, customers who shop online could have faced higher shipping fees and longer waits. In recent weeks, large and small businesses worked to create contingency plans in the event of a strike. Joseph Debicella, a small business owner who sells bridesmaids' gifts online, said his company shifts roughly 50% of its orders through UPS. He hasn't used FedEx, but he created an account with the company 2 weeks ago as a chatter over a strike picked up. He was also hearing about the negotiations from his UPS driver, who told him his deliveries were getting lighter as the July 31st deadline for a new contract neared. Macy's CEO Jeff Jeanette told the Associated Press that the department store chain was considering its options and that its supply chain team was mapping out what a strike would look like and how it would affect shipping. If ratified, the deal could prevent major disruption just as retailers are in the throes of the back-to-school shopping season, the second largest sales period behind the winter holidays. The Retail Industry Leaders Association, a national retail trade group that counts retailers including Best Buy, CVS Health, and Kohl's as members, called the tentative pact, quote, an enormous relief to retailers who have been navigating the possibility of a strike and the associated uncertainty for weeks. We're grateful that this challenge, which would have had a price tag in the billions of dollars and a long runway for recovery, was avoided, end of quote. Labor experts see the showdown as a demonstration of labor power at a time of low U.S. union membership. Unionists have grown more active this summer thanks to several organized labor pushes at major companies. Hollywood actors and screenwriters are picketing over pay issues. United Auto Workers are also considering a potential strike. In a statement after the UPS deal was announced, Association of Flight Attendants CWA President Sarah Nelson said, quote, this is how it's done, and this labor solidarity summer just got stronger, end of quote. I agree with her. Folks, the power of collective bargaining is right there in front of your face. Do yourself a favor. Join a union. Start a union. Get organized. It'll help you out in the long run. That's it for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.